The winter wind howled across the Texas plains with such ferocity that Yates Emerson could barely see his horse's ears through the swirling snow. And he was beginning to think he'd made a terrible mistake leaving Eagle Pass in weather like this when he spotted what looked like a dark shape huddled against a boulder just off the trail. His gut clenched as he pulled his bay gelding to a stop, squinting through the white curtain of snowflakes that had been falling for 3 days straight, turning the normally arid landscape into something he barely recognized. The shape moved, and Yates felt his heart kick hard against his ribs. It was a person. No, 2 people. He urged his horse forward, fighting against the wind that tried to push him back toward town. As he drew closer, he could make out a woman wrapped in what had once been a decent wool coat, now soaked through and frozen stiff in places. She was curled around something, protecting it with her body, and when she lifted her head to look at him, Yates saw eyes the color of storm clouds, wide with fear and exhaustion and something else he couldn't quite name. Hope, maybe, or desperation. "Help us," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Please, my son." Yates was off his horse before he'd even processed the decision, his boots crunching in the snow that had already drifted knee-high in some places. He knelt beside her, and that's when he saw the child, a little boy no more than 3 years old, wrapped in his mother's arms. The boy's lips had a bluish tinge that Yates didn't like one bit, and his small body was shaking with cold. "How long have you been out here?" Yates asked, already shrugging out of his heavy sheepskin coat. "Since yesterday morning," the woman said, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely get the words out. "My husband, he left us here, said he was going for help, but he never came back." Yates felt a surge of anger so hot it nearly burned through the cold that had settled into his bones. What kind of man would leave his wife and child in weather like this? But there was no time for questions now. He could see hypothermia setting in, could see the way the woman's movements were becoming sluggish, the way her eyes were starting to glaze over. "Listen to me," he said firmly, wrapping his coat around both of them. "You're both coming with me, right now. Can you stand?" The woman tried, but her legs wouldn't hold her. She crumpled back down, a sob of frustration escaping her cracked lips. "I cannot. I tried. I cannot feel my feet." Yates didn't waste another second. He scooped the boy up first, tucking him inside his vest against his chest where his body heat might do some good. The child whimpered but didn't cry, which worried Yates more than screaming would have. Then he bent and lifted the woman, grunting with effort as he stood. She was light, too light, like she hadn't eaten properly in days, maybe weeks. "What's your name?" he asked as he carried her to his horse. "Lillian," she managed. "Lillian Brennan. My son is Thomas." "Yates Emerson," he replied, trying to figure out how in the hell he was going to get all 3 of them on his horse. "We're about 2 miles from Eagle Pass. I'm going to get you there, but you need to stay awake, understand? Keep talking to me." Getting mounted with a woman and child in his arms while the wind tried to knock them all over was one of the hardest things Yates had ever done, and he'd broken wild mustangs and wrestled steers twice his size. But somehow he managed it, settling Lillian in front of him and keeping Thomas pressed between them where the combined heat of their bodies might save him. He wrapped his coat around all of them as best he could and turned his gelding back toward town. "Tell me about Thomas," he said, trying to keep Lillian conscious. "How old is he?" 3, Lillian said, her voice slurred with cold. 3 years old last month. He loves horses. Always wanted to see them, touch them." "Well, he's on a fine one right now," Yates said, urging his gelding into a careful walk. The snow was treacherous, and the last thing they needed was for the horse to stumble. "This here's Dakota. Best cow horse I ever trained." Lillian was quiet for a moment, and Yates felt panic rise in his chest. "Lillian, stay with me. Tell me something else." "Where are you from?" "St. Louis," she murmured. "Came west 6 months ago. My husband said there were opportunities that we could make a good life. He lied about everything." Yates felt that anger again, burning hot and fierce. He'd seen too many men like that, men who dragged their families west with big promises and no real plans, men who couldn't handle it when things got hard. But to abandon them like this, in a blizzard that had caught everyone by surprise, even the old-timers who swore they could feel weather in their bones, that was beyond anything Yates could understand. "You're safe now," he said, and meant it. "Both of you, I promise." The ride back to Eagle Pass felt like it took hours, though it couldn't have been more than 30 minutes. By the time they reached the edge of town, Yates could barely feel his own fingers, and he was more worried than ever about Lillian and Thomas. The woman had gone quiet, her head lolling against his chest, and the boy hadn't moved in too long. Eagle Pass was a small town, just a main street with a handful of businesses, a church, a schoolhouse, and maybe 30 or 40 homes scattered around. Yates headed straight for Doc Morrison's place, a tidy white house at the end of Main Street. He half fell off his horse, managing to keep his grip on Lillian and Thomas, and kicked at the door since his hands were full. Doc Morrison, a grizzled man in his 60s with kind eyes and steady hands, took one look at them and swung the door wide. "Sweet Jesus, Yates, get them inside." "Martha," he called to his wife. "Heat water and get blankets, quick now." The next hour was a blur of activity. Doc Morrison worked on Thomas while his wife, Martha, a capable woman who'd seen just about everything in her years as a doctor's wife, helped Lillian out of her wet clothes and into a warm bed. Yates paced the hallway, dripping melting snow all over Martha's clean floors and not caring one bit. He'd never been so scared in his life, and he barely knew these people. But something about Lillian's eyes, about the fierce way she'd been protecting her son even as she was freezing to death, had gotten under his skin. "They going to make it, Doc?" Yates asked when the doctor finally emerged from the back room. "The boy's young and strong. He'll pull through, I think, though it was a near thing. The woman, she's in rough shape. Hypothermia, malnutrition, exhaustion. She's been through hell, Yates, even before the cold got her." Doc Morrison fixed him with a serious look. "You saved their lives today. Another hour and we'd be planning a funeral instead of a recovery." Yates felt something loosen in his chest, though worry still gnawed at him. "She said her husband left them out there, said he was going for help." Doc Morrison's expression darkened. "Did she say his name?" "No, just that her last name's Brennan." "I'll ask around," the doctor said. "But Yates, even if we find him, I'm not sure what good it'll do. A man who'd abandon his family like that isn't much of a man at all." Yates couldn't argue with that. He stayed at the doctor's house until well after dark, until Martha finally shooed him home with promises that she'd send word if anything changed. He trudged through the snow to his small house on the outskirts of town, a 2-room cabin he'd built himself when he'd first settled in Eagle Pass 5 years ago. It was humble but solid, with a good stove and a comfortable bed, and right now it felt emptier than it ever had before. He couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lillian's face, pale and drawn with suffering, saw little Thomas's blue lips. He'd never thought much about having a family of his own. At 28, he was still young enough that it hadn't seemed urgent, and his work as a horse trainer and occasional ranch hand kept him busy. But something had shifted in him today, something he couldn't quite name. The storm blew itself out during the night, and Yates was at Doc Morrison's door before the sun was fully up. Martha let him in with a knowing smile that made his ears burn, but he didn't care about that. He just needed to know they were all right. "The boy's awake," Martha said, leading him back to the room where they were staying. Asking for his mama. And she's doing better, though still very weak. You can see them, but just for a few minutes. Yates stepped into the room and felt his breath catch. Lillian was propped up on pillows, her dark hair spread around her shoulders, and even pale and exhausted, she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. Thomas was curled up beside her, and when the boy saw Yates, his eyes went wide. "That's the horseman," Thomas said, his voice a thin whisper. "Mama, that's the man with the horse." Lillian turned to look at him, and Yates saw tears spill down her cheeks. "You saved our lives," she said, her voice breaking. "I do not know how to thank you. I do not know how I can ever repay such a debt." Yates crossed the room and knelt beside the bed, feeling awkward and tongue-tied in a way he hadn't since he was a boy. "No debt," he said firmly. "Anyone would have done the same." "But they did not," Lillian said softly. "My husband did not. He left us there to die." "Tell me what happened," Yates said gently, "if you're up to it." Lillian looked down at Thomas, who had already drifted back to sleep, worn out from his ordeal. "We came west because my husband, Charles, convinced me that he had opportunities here. He said he had work lined up, that we would have a better life than we could in St. Louis. But it was all lies. When we arrived in Texas, there was no work, no prospects. He grew angry, started drinking. We ran out of money, and he became desperate." She paused, gathering herself, and Yates waited patiently. "3 days ago, he said he knew where we could find help, that there was a town not far away. We set out, but then the storm hit. It was so sudden, so fierce. Charles said he was going to ride ahead to get help, that Thomas and I should wait. But he never came back. I realized after hours passed that he was not coming back, that he had left us there on purpose." Yates felt his jaw clench so hard his teeth ached. "Do you know where he might have gone?" "No," Lillian said, and there was a finality in her voice. "And I do not care. Whatever I felt for that man died when he left my son to freeze. I have no husband anymore." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Yates knew he should say something comforting, something proper, but all he could think about was how glad he was that Charles Brennan was out of the picture, and what kind of man did that make him. "You and Thomas can stay at my place," he heard himself say. "Once you're well enough to leave here. It's not much, but it's warm and dry and there's room. You'll need time to figure out what to do next, and you should not have to do that alone." Lillian stared at him, and Yates could see her struggling with pride, with the impossibility of her situation, with the kindness of a stranger. "I cannot ask that of you. You have done so much already." "You're not asking, I'm offering." Yates stood, suddenly nervous about the boldness of his suggestion. "Think about it. Rest now. I'll come back tomorrow." He left before she could protest, before he could second-guess himself, and spent the rest of the day working with a young mare that needed breaking. The physical work helped settle his mind, helped him make sense of the confusing tangle of feelings that had taken root in his chest. By the time evening rolled around, he'd made peace with his decision. Lillian and Thomas needed help, and he was in a position to give it. It was as simple as that, except it wasn't simple at all, and Yates knew it. He'd felt something when he looked into Lillian's eyes, something he'd never felt before. A pull, a connection, a sense of rightness that made no logical sense given that they'd only just met. But he couldn't deny it, couldn't pretend he didn't want to see her again, to talk to her, to learn everything about her. Over the next week, Yates visited the Morrison house every day. At first, his visits were brief, just checking in to make sure Lillian and Thomas were recovering. But gradually, they grew longer. He'd sit with Thomas and tell him stories about horses, about the ranch work he did, about growing up in Texas. The boy was shy at first, but he warmed up quickly, his eyes lighting up whenever Yates arrived. And Lillian, She watched him with an expression Yates couldn't quite read. Gratitude, certainly, but something else too. Something cautious and hopeful and scared all at once. "Why are you being so kind to us?" she asked one afternoon when Thomas had fallen asleep for a nap. "You do not know us. You owe us nothing." Yates considered the question, turning it over in his mind. He could give her a simple answer, something about Christian charity or basic human decency. But Lillian deserved honesty, especially after everything she'd been through. "I grew up without a father," he said finally. "He died when I was 4, and I barely remember him. My mother, she worked herself half to death trying to keep us fed and clothed. People helped us along the way, gave us chances we would not have had otherwise. I guess I figure I should pay that forward when I can." It was true as far as it went, but it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that he couldn't stop thinking about Lillian, couldn't stop wanting to make her smile, to chase away the shadows in her eyes. But he couldn't say that, not yet. "I am sorry about your father," Lillian said softly, "and grateful for those who helped you. But Yates, I need you to understand something. I have nothing to offer you in return for this kindness. I have no money, no prospects, and a child to care for. I do not want you to think that I am trying to trap you into anything, or that I expect anything from you beyond the help you have already given." Yates leaned forward, holding her gaze. "Did I ask for anything? No, but men usually do, in my experience." "Well, I'm not most men." He said it simply, without arrogance, just stating a fact. "You and Thomas need help right now, and I'm offering it freely. When you're back on your feet, you can decide what you want to do next. If you want to stay in Eagle Pass, I know folks who might have worked for you. If you want to go somewhere else, I'll help you get there. But for now, just rest and recover. Let me worry about everything else." Lillian's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they looked like tears of relief rather than grief. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." 10 days after Yates had found them in the snow, Doc Morrison declared Lillian and Thomas well enough to leave his care. Yates borrowed a wagon from his friend Jake Hollister, who owned the livery stable, and drove it to the Morrison house to collect them. Thomas was excited, bouncing on his toes despite still being thinner and more fragile than Yates would have liked. "Are we really going to see your house?" the boy asked, tugging on Yates's sleeve. "Will Dakota be there?" "Dakota and 3 other horses," Yates confirmed. "And a chicken coop, though the hens are mean and like to peck. You have to watch out for them." Thomas giggled, the sound bright and clear, and Yates felt something warm bloom in his chest. This was what a child should sound like, he thought. Happy and safe, not scared and freezing. Lillian was quieter as Yates helped her into the wagon, but he could see her taking in everything around her, the town that might become her home. Eagle Pass was small but growing, with new buildings going up every few months. It was rough around the edges like most Texas towns, but the people were decent for the most part, and there was a sense of community that Yates valued. "It's not much of a place," he said as they drove through town. "But it's honest. People work hard and help their neighbors. You'll be safe here." "Safe," Lillian repeated, like she was testing out the word. I had forgotten what that felt like. Yates's house was about a mile outside of town, close enough to walk but far enough to feel private. It sat on 10 acres of scrubby grassland, with a small barn for the horses and a pen for the chickens. The house itself was simple, built from good Texas pine, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area and a bedroom in the back. Yates had built a small loft above the main room when he'd first constructed the place, thinking he might need the extra space someday, and he'd never been more grateful for that foresight than he was now. "Thomas can sleep in the loft," he said as he helped them inside. "And you can have the bedroom. I'll make a bed for myself out here by the stove." Lillian looked around the space, and Yates tried to see it through her eyes. It was clean and tidy if sparse. He'd never bothered much with decorations or comforts beyond the basics. But it was warm and solid, and right now, that was what mattered. "This is your home," Lillian protested. "We cannot displace you like this." "You're not displacing me, I'm offering." Yates set down the small bag of belongings that Martha Morrison had put together for them, clothes donated by various townspeople. "Please, Lillian, let me do this." She met his eyes, and Yates saw her defenses crack just a little more. "All right," she said quietly. "But only until I can find work and a place of our own. I will not be a burden on you forever." "You're not a burden," Yates said, and meant it with everything in him. That first night set the pattern for the weeks that followed. Yates woke early, as he always did, and made breakfast for the three of them. Lillian tried to take over the cooking, insisting that it was the least she could do, but he could see she was still recovering her strength. They compromised, working together in the small kitchen, and Yates discovered that he liked the domestic rhythm of it, the quiet companionship of morning tasks. After breakfast, Yates would head out to work. He had contracts with several of the larger ranches in the area to break and train their horses, and the work kept him busy most days. But he found himself hurrying through his tasks, eager to get home, to see how Lillian and Thomas were doing. Lillian used the time to clean the house from top to bottom, despite Yates's protests that it was unnecessary. She mended his clothes, the few that had tears or loose buttons, and cooked proper meals, the kind he hadn't bothered with when he was living alone. And slowly, bit by bit, she began to look healthier. Color returned to her cheeks, and the dark circles under her eyes faded. She smiled more often, especially when Thomas did something that delighted her, and Yates found himself living for those smiles. Thomas was fascinated by everything. He followed Yates around when the man was home, asking 1,000 questions about the horses, the chickens, the work he did. Yates, who'd never spent much time around children, discovered that he had a knack for explaining things in ways the boy could understand. He started teaching Thomas how to care for the animals, simple tasks like filling water buckets and scattering feed for the chickens. "He loves you already," Lillian said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Thomas play in the yard. The weather had turned milder, though it was still cold enough that they could see their breath. "I have never seen him take to someone so quickly." Yates felt his chest tighten with emotion. "He's a good boy. You've done well with him." "I have tried," Lillian said. "But it has been hard, especially this past year. Charles was not a good father even before he abandoned us. He was impatient with Thomas, quick to anger. I spent so much energy trying to keep the peace, trying to protect Thomas from his father's moods." "You don't have to do that anymore," Yates said quietly. "He's safe here, you both are." Lillian turned to look at him, and in the fading light her eyes seemed to glow. "Why are you doing this, Yates? Really?" It was the second time she'd asked, and this time, Yates knew he had to give her the whole truth. He took a breath, gathering his courage. "At first, it was just about helping someone in need, but now I look forward to coming home in a way I never did before. I like hearing Thomas laugh. I like talking to you over dinner. I like having you both here." "Yates," Lillian said, her voice uncertain. "I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I'm just being honest. You asked why, and that's why, but I meant what I said before. No expectations, no pressure. Just help, for as long as you need it." Lillian was quiet for a long moment, and Yates worried that he'd overstepped, that he'd made her uncomfortable. But then she reached out and took his hand, her fingers small and warm in his. "I like being here too," she said softly. "It scares me how much I like it. After Charles, I swore I would never trust another man, but you make it very difficult to keep that promise to myself." Yates squeezed her hand gently. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." They sat like that until full dark, hands linked, watching Thomas play, and Yates felt a peace settle over him that he'd never known before. This, he thought, this is what home should feel like. Winter gradually gave way to early spring, though in Texas that meant the bitter cold was replaced by unpredictable weather that could swing from warm and sunny to cold and rainy in the span of hours. Yates continued his work, and Lillian grew stronger and more confident. She started talking about finding work, about becoming independent, but Yates could tell her heart wasn't fully in it. And selfishly, he didn't want her to leave. He wanted her to stay, wanted to come home to her and Thomas every night for the rest of his life. One afternoon in late March, Yates came home early to find Lillian sitting on the porch steps, crying. His heart lurched with panic and he was off his horse in an instant, kneeling in front of her. "What's wrong? Is it Thomas? Is he hurt?" No, Thomas is fine. He is napping." Lillian wiped at her tears, trying to compose herself. "I am sorry. I did not expect you home so early." "What happened?" Yates asked gently, taking her hands in his. Lillian looked at him, and he saw a turmoil of emotions in her eyes. "I went into town today to ask about work. And I heard something. Charles is dead." Yates felt the words land like a physical blow, though not for the reason Lillian might have thought. "How?" "He was in a saloon in Del Rio, got into a fight over a card game. Someone shot him." Lillian's voice was flat, emotionless. "He has been dead for over a month, and I did not even know. I should feel something, should not I? Grief or sadness or something. But I feel nothing except relief, and that makes me feel like a terrible person." Yates pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "You're not terrible. You're human. That man hurt you and Thomas. He abandoned you to die. You don't owe him your grief." Lillian clung to him, and Yates felt her body shake with sobs that seemed torn from somewhere deep inside her. He just held her, letting her cry, letting her feel whatever she needed to feel. When she finally quieted, she pulled back just enough to look up at him. "I am a widow now," she said, "free, and I do not know what to do with that freedom." Yates reached up and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. "You don't have to figure it all out today. Take your time." "But I want to figure it out," Lillian said, and there was a fierceness in her voice that Yates had never heard before. "I have been drifting for so long, letting life happen to me instead of making choices. I am tired of being afraid. I am tired of being uncertain. What do you want?" Yates asked, his heart pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. Lillian looked at him, really looked at him, and Yates saw the walls she'd been keeping up start to crumble. "I want to stay here, with you, if you will have us." Yates felt like all the air had been knocked out of his lungs. "Lillian, are you sure? I do not want you to feel obligated because I helped you. I do not want you to think you owe me anything." "This is not about obligation," Lillian said firmly. "This is about the fact that I have fallen in love with you, Yates Emerson, even though I swore I would never love anyone again. This is about the fact that Thomas asks every night if you are going to stay with us forever. This is about the fact that this house feels more like home than anywhere I have ever lived. So yes, I am sure." Yates stared at her, stunned into silence for a moment. Then he did the only thing that made sense. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gently at first, then deeper as she responded, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck. It was a kiss full of promise and hope, and all the feelings he'd been holding back for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too," he said. "I think I have since the moment I saw you in that snow, fighting to protect your son. I did not know it was possible to fall so hard so fast, but here we are." Lillian laughed, the sound bright and joyful. "Here we are indeed." "Marry me," Yates said, the words tumbling out before he could second-guess himself. I know it is soon, and I know you just got free, but marry me. Let me be Thomas's father. Let me spend the rest of my life making you happy." "Yes," Lillian said without hesitation. "Yes, yes, yes." They kissed again, and this time when they broke apart, they were both grinning like fools. Yates felt lighter than he had in years, felt like he could do anything as long as Lillian was by his side. "Yates." A small voice came from the doorway, and they both turned to see Thomas standing there, rubbing his eyes. "Why is Mama crying?" "I am not crying," Lillian said, going to scoop him up. "Well, I am, but these are happy tears. Yates has asked me to marry him, and I said yes." Thomas's eyes went wide. "Does that mean Yates will be my papa?" Yates felt his throat tighten with emotion. He crossed to them and put a hand on Thomas's small shoulder. "If you want me to be, I would be honored to be your papa." Thomas thought about this for a moment, his face serious in that way children have when they are considering something very important. Then he broke into a huge smile. "I want that very much. Will you teach me to ride Dakota?" Yates laughed, the sound full and genuine. "I will teach you everything I know, son." The word son hung in the air, precious and perfect, and Yates saw Lillian's eyes fill with happy tears again. They stood there together, the three of them, and Yates knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where he was meant to be. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Eagle Pass, with half the town in attendance. Lillian wore a simple dress that Martha Morrison had helped her sew, pale blue cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. She looked so beautiful that Yates forgot to breathe for a moment when he saw her walking down the aisle. Thomas stood beside him as his best man, looking very serious and important in his new shirt and pants. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. Yates spoke his vows clearly, his voice strong and sure. "I promise to love you and honor you, to protect you and Thomas, to be a good husband and father, for all the days of my life." Lillian's voice trembled slightly when she spoke hers, but her eyes never left his face. "I promise to love you and stand beside you, to be your partner and your friend, to build a life with you full of joy and laughter, for all the days of my life." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed Lillian with all the love in his heart, and the congregation cheered. Thomas tugged on his jacket, and Yates bent down so the boy could kiss his cheek too, which made everyone laugh and cheer even louder. The reception was held in the church hall, with food and music and dancing. Jake Hollister played his fiddle, and Yates danced with his new wife, holding her close and marveling at how his life had changed in just a few short months. In January, he'd been alone. Now in May, he had a wife and a son and a future so bright it almost hurt to look at. "Are you happy?" Lillian asked as they swayed to the music. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Yates said honestly. "You, more than words can say," Lillian replied, reaching up to touch his face. "Thank you for saving us. Thank you for loving us." "Thank you for letting me," Yates said and kissed her again, soft and sweet. Later that night, after they'd returned home and put Thomas to bed in his loft, Yates and Lillian sat on the porch together, watching the stars come out. The spring air was mild and sweet, carrying the scent of wildflowers from the prairie. "I have been thinking," Lillian said, nestled against Yates's side, "about the future." "Oh," Yates prompted, running his fingers through her hair. "I want more children," Lillian said. "Thomas should have brothers and sisters, and I want to give you children, Yates. I want our family to grow." Yates felt warmth spread through his chest. He'd thought about this too, imagined a house full of children, a big noisy family. "I want that too," he said, "as many as we are blessed with." "Good," Lillian said, tilting her face up to kiss him. "Then let us start trying for that future right now." Yates laughed and pulled her to her feet, swinging her into his arms. "Yes, madam," he said, carrying her into the house and closing the door behind them. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Yates's life. He threw himself into his work with renewed energy, driven by the knowledge that he was building something for his family. He took on more training contracts, saved more money, and started planning expansions to the house and barn. They would need more space when the family grew, and he wanted to be prepared. Lillian bloomed in their marriage. She was more confident, more at ease than Yates had ever seen her. She made friends in town, became part of the community in a way that clearly meant a lot to her. And she was a wonderful mother to Thomas, patient and loving and firm when she needed to be. Thomas himself was thriving. The scared, fragile child Yates had pulled from the snow was gone, replaced by a bright, curious boy who seemed to find wonder in everything around him. He followed Yates everywhere, learning to care for the horses, to mend tack, to ride. Yates found that fatherhood came naturally to him, that he loved teaching Thomas, loved seeing the world through the boy's eyes. In September, Lillian told Yates she was expecting. They were in the barn, and Yates had been showing Thomas how to brush down Dakota when Lillian appeared in the doorway, her hand resting on her still flat belly, and a smile on her face that told him everything he needed to know. He crossed to her in 3 long strides and picked her up, spinning her around while she laughed. "Really? Are you sure?" "I am sure," Lillian said, her eyes bright with joy. "Doc Morrison confirmed it this morning. The baby should come in April." Thomas ran over, tugging on Yates's sleeve. "What is happening? Why is everyone happy?" Yates set Lillian down carefully and then bent to Thomas's level. "You are going to be a big brother," he said. "Your mama is having a baby." Thomas's eyes went huge. "Really? A real baby?" "A real baby," Lillian confirmed, and Thomas let out a whoop of excitement that startled the horses and made them all laugh. That night, after Thomas was asleep, Yates and Lillian lay in bed together, his hand resting on her belly. "I am so happy," he said softly. "I never imagined I could have this. A family, a home, you. We are the lucky ones," Lillian said, covering his hand with hers. "If you had not found us in that snow, Thomas and I would be dead. Instead, we have this life, this love. Every day I wake up grateful." "I am the one who is grateful," Yates insisted. "You have given me everything I did not know I was missing." They made love that night, slow and tender, celebrating the life growing inside her and the life they were building together. And afterwards, as Lillian slept in his arms, Yates stared at the ceiling and counted his blessings. He thought about the man he'd been before that snowy day in January, content enough, but ultimately alone. And he thought about the man he was now, a husband and father with a family to love and protect. The transformation was so complete, so profound that it almost felt like a dream, but it was no dream. It was real and solid and his, and he would spend the rest of his life being worthy of it. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Lillian had bouts of morning sickness that worried Yates until Doc Morrison assured him it was perfectly normal. As winter came on again, Yates made sure the house was well stocked with food and supplies, determined that Lillian would want for nothing. He finished the expansion on the house too, adding a second bedroom so that Thomas would have his own space and the baby would have a nursery. Thomas was fascinated by his mother's growing belly, constantly asking questions about the baby. Lillian answered him with patience and honesty, explaining how the baby was growing, how it would need care and attention when it arrived. "Will you still love me when the baby comes?" Thomas asked one evening, and Lillian's heart broke a little at the vulnerability in his voice. "Oh, my sweet boy," she said, pulling him into her lap even though it was getting harder to do so with her belly in the way. "I will always love you more than anything in this world. Having another baby does not take away any of the love I have for you." Love is not like bread where you have to divide it up so everyone gets a piece. Love grows. The more people you have to love, the more love you have. Do you understand? Thomas thought about this, his face scrunched up in concentration. So you will love the baby and me the same amount. I will love you both completely, Lillian said, and so will Yates. She is right, Yates said, coming to sit beside them. My heart is big enough for all of you, Thomas. You are my son, and nothing will ever change that. Thomas seemed satisfied with this answer and returned to his dinner, but Yates and Lillian exchanged a look over his head. They both understood that Thomas's insecurity came from his early years with Charles, from a father who'd never had enough love or patience. They would need to be vigilant, to make sure Thomas knew he was valued and loved even as they welcomed a new child into their family. Christmas that year was special. Yates cut down a small pine tree and brought it into the house, and they decorated it with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments that Thomas made. Lillian baked cookies and pies, filling the house with wonderful smells. And on Christmas morning, Yates gave Lillian a rocking chair he'd built himself, perfect for nursing the baby. Lillian cried happy tears and told him it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. For Thomas, Yates had spent weeks carving a set of toy horses, each one carefully detailed and smoothed. The boy was overjoyed, lining them up on the floor and making them race across the room. For Yates, Lillian had knitted a thick wool scarf in deep blue, and when he wrapped it around his neck, she told him the color matched his eyes. "This is the best Christmas I have ever had," Thomas announced as they sat around the table for Christmas dinner, and Yates had to agree. Last Christmas he'd been alone, eating a simple meal and going to bed early. This year, he was surrounded by love and laughter and the promise of even more joy to come. Winter gave way to spring, and as April approached, Yates found himself growing increasingly nervous. What if something went wrong? What if he failed Lillian when she needed him most? Doc Morrison assured him that everything looked good, that Lillian was healthy and strong, but Yates could not shake his worry. The baby came on a warm April evening, 3 weeks before the due date Doc Morrison had estimated. Yates had been in the barn when he heard Lillian call out, and he'd run to the house so fast he nearly tripped over his own feet. Lillian was standing in the kitchen, one hand on her belly and the other gripping the table. "The baby is coming," she said, her voice tight. "You need to get Doc Morrison." Yates felt panic surge through him, but he forced himself to stay calm. "All right. You sit down. I will get Thomas settled with Martha and bring the doc back. Just breathe, all right." He rode into town faster than he'd ever ridden before, dropping Thomas at the Morrison house with a quick explanation before racing back with Doc Morrison in tow. By the time they returned, Lillian's contractions were coming hard and fast, and Yates felt utterly useless as Martha Morrison took charge, boiling water and gathering clean linens. "You stay with her," Doc Morrison said, gesturing Yates into the bedroom. "Hold her hand, talk to her, help her through this." Labor was harder than Yates had imagined, seeing Lillian in pain and not being able to do anything about it. But he stayed by her side, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, telling her how strong she was, how proud he was of her. "I cannot do this," Lillian gasped at one point, her face pale and drawn. "It hurts too much." "Yes, you can," Yates said firmly. "You are the strongest person I know. You survived a blizzard. You survived being abandoned. You can survive this, and I am right here with you." Lillian squeezed his hand so hard he thought she might break bones, but he did not flinch, just kept encouraging her, kept loving her through every contraction. And then, as the sun was setting and casting golden light through the bedroom window, Doc Morrison said, "One more push, Lillian." Give me one more good push." Lillian bore down with everything she had, and Yates heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the cry of a newborn baby. "It is a boy," Doc Morrison announced, holding up a small, red, squalling infant. "A healthy baby boy." Yates felt tears stream down his face as the doctor cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him in Lillian's arms. She was crying too, looking down at their son with such love that Yates thought his heart might burst from his chest. "He is perfect," Lillian whispered. "Yates, look at him. He is perfect." Yates sat on the edge of the bed and wrapped his arms around both of them, staring in wonder at the tiny face, the miniature fingers curled into fists. "He is," Yates agreed, his voice choked with emotion. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at their son, Lillian said, "What about Yates?" After his father, Yates shook his head. "No, I want him to have his own name. What about Henry? Henry Emerson." "Henry," Lillian repeated, testing it out. "Yes, Henry Emerson." "It is perfect." Doc Morrison finished his work and left them alone, promising to check back in the morning. Martha brought Thomas home and the boy tiptoed into the bedroom, his eyes huge as he looked at his new brother. "He is so small," Thomas whispered. "Can I touch him?" "Gently," Lillian said, guiding Thomas's hand to touch Henry's soft cheek. "This is your brother, Thomas. He is going to need you to help teach him things, to be a good big brother to him." Thomas's face was serious as he nodded. "I will be the best big brother," he promised. "I will protect him always." Yates put his arm around Thomas, pulling him close. "I know you will, son." That night, after Thomas had gone to bed and Henry was sleeping in the cradle Yates had made, Yates and Lillian lay together in the quiet darkness. Lillian was exhausted but glowing, and Yates could not stop looking at her, at the miracle of what she'd just done. "Thank you," he said softly, "for Henry, for Thomas, for this life. Thank you for everything." Lillian turned her head to look at him, her eyes soft. "Thank you for finding us in that snow. Thank you for giving us this chance at happiness. I love you, Yates Emerson, more than I can ever express." "I love you too," Yates said, leaning over to kiss her gently. "More than anything in this world." The months after Henry's birth were busy and exhausting and wonderful. Yates had forgotten how much work a baby could be, the constant feeding and changing and soothing. But he loved every moment of it, loved holding his son, loved watching Lillian nurse him, loved seeing Thomas interact with his little brother with such gentle care. As Henry grew, his personality began to emerge. He was a happy baby, quick to smile and laugh, with bright blue eyes like his father. Thomas adored him, always wanting to help, to hold him, to play with him. And Lillian seemed to glow with contentment, splitting her time between caring for Henry and running the household and spending time with Thomas. Yates's horse training business continued to thrive, and he was making good money, enough that he could start thinking about buying more land, expanding their small ranch. He talked to Lillian about it one evening after the boys were in bed. "I was thinking we could buy the 20 acres adjacent to our property," he said. "Old man Henderson is selling, and the price is fair. We could run some cattle, maybe build up a proper ranch, something to pass on to the boys when they are grown." Lillian's eyes lit up with interest. "I think that is a wonderful idea. But Yates, are you sure we can afford it?" "I have been saving," Yates said. "Between the horse training and the work I have been doing for the Johnson Ranch, we have enough, and I think it is time we started building something bigger, something that will last." "Then let us do it," Lillian said, reaching for his hand. "Let us build our future." So Yates bought the land, and over the next year, he and Lillian slowly built up their ranch. They started with a small herd of cattle, just 20 head, and Yates hired a young man named Peter Wright to help with the work. Peter was 18 and eager to learn, and he quickly became almost like family, eating dinner with them most nights and teaching Thomas ranch skills. Thomas was growing tall and strong, no longer the fragile child they'd rescued from the snow. He was 6 now, and starting school in town, where the teacher reported that he was bright and curious and well-behaved. He loved helping Yates with the horses and cattle, loved being out on the land, and Yates knew with certainty that Thomas would grow up to be a fine rancher. Henry was walking now, getting into everything with the fearless determination of a toddler. He followed Thomas everywhere, mimicking his big brother's every move. And Lillian, she was pregnant again, due in the late autumn. This time, Yates felt more prepared, less anxious, though he still worried about her. "I am fine," Lillian assured him when he fussed over her. "This pregnancy is easier than Henry's was. Stop worrying so much." "I cannot help it," Yates said, kissing her forehead. "You are precious to me. I do not want anything to happen to you." "Nothing is going to happen," Lillian said firmly. "We are going to have this baby, and it is going to be healthy, and our family is going to keep growing and thriving. Have faith, Yates." And she was right. In October, Lillian gave birth to a daughter, a tiny, perfect girl with dark hair like her mother and a loud cry that announced her presence to the world. They named her Sarah, after Yates's mother, and both boys were instantly smitten with their baby sister. "She is so pretty," Thomas said, holding her carefully while Yates supported his arms. "Look at her tiny fingers." Henry, at 2 years old, was less interested in holding Sarah and more interested in poking her, which Lillian gently discouraged. But Yates could see the beginnings of what would be a close bond between all 3 children, and it filled him with satisfaction. Life settled into a rhythm over the next few years. The ranch grew, slowly but steadily. Yates's reputation as a horse trainer spread, and he had more work than he could handle. Lillian kept the household running smoothly, raised the children, and helped with the ranch bookkeeping. Thomas grew into a capable young man, taking on more responsibilities. Henry was rambunctious and adventurous, always getting into scrapes that gave Lillian gray hairs. And Sarah was sweet and clever, with her mother's fierce determination and her father's gentle heart. In 1881, when Thomas was 10 and Sarah was 3, Lillian told Yates she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was harder. Lillian was tired more often, and there were complications that worried Doc Morrison. Yates tried not to let his fear show, but Lillian knew him too well. "I am going to be fine," she told him. "We are both going to be fine. Stop looking at me like I am made of glass." "I just worry," Yates admitted. "We have so much to lose now." "And we have so much to gain," Lillian countered. "Another child, Yates. Another little person to love. Is that not worth the risk?" "You are worth more to me than anything," Yates said. "If it came down to choosing between you and the baby, I would choose you every time." Lillian touched his face gently. "It will not come to that. Have faith." And once again, Lillian was right. In March of 1882, she gave birth to twin boys, identical in every way, with red hair and green eyes that looked like they came from nowhere, until Yates remembered his grandmother had been a redhead. They named them James and John, and suddenly the house was full to bursting with children and noise and chaos. Those early months with the twins were exhausting. 5 children, the youngest being 2 infants who seemed determined to take turns crying through the night, stretched everyone to their limits. But they managed, working together as a family. Thomas and Sarah helped with the younger children, and Peter Wright, who'd been working for them for 6 years now and was like a brother to Thomas, pitched in too. "I do not know how you do it," Peter said one evening as he watched Lillian somehow manage to nurse one twin while supervising Henry's homework and helping Sarah set the table for dinner. "She is amazing." "She is," Yates agreed, feeling that familiar swell of love and pride. "I am the luckiest man alive." As the twins grew, their personalities began to diverge. James was serious and thoughtful, while John was outgoing and mischievous. They were inseparable, though, communicating in ways that seemed almost magical to the rest of the family. And all the children doted on them, especially Sarah, who appointed herself their protector and caretaker. The ranch continued to prosper. By 1885, they had expanded to over 300 acres and were running a sizable herd of cattle. Thomas, now 14, was essentially Yates's right-hand man, capable of doing everything from breaking horses to managing the cattle. Peter had become the ranch foreman, overseeing the handful of additional hands they'd hired. And Yates found himself in the position of being a successful rancher, something he'd never imagined when he'd first come to Eagle Pass. But success, he'd learned, was not measured in land or cattle or money. Success was coming home at the end of a long day to a house full of children and laughter. Success was sitting on the porch with Lillian after everyone was asleep, her hand in his, talking about their dreams for the future. Success was watching his children grow and thrive, knowing they were safe and loved. "You ever think about that day?" Lillian asked him one evening. "The day you found us in the snow, all the time," Yates admitted. "I think about how easily I could have missed you, how close we came to never having this life. It terrifies me sometimes." "It does not terrify me," Lillian said, "because I believe it was meant to be. I believe you were meant to find us, that we were meant to be together. Everything that happened, all the pain and suffering, it led us here. And here is exactly where I want to be." Yates pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I love you," he said. "I will never stop being grateful that you chose me, that you built this life with me." "I love you too," Lillian said, "and I would choose you again, every single day for the rest of my life." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Thomas grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with his mother's intelligence and compassion. At 18, he started courting Elizabeth Carson, the daughter of a neighboring rancher, and Yates and Lillian watched with approval as their oldest son fell in love. Henry, at 14, was wild and adventurous, always pushing boundaries and testing limits. But he had a good heart, and he was fiercely protective of his siblings, especially Sarah and the twins. He talked about becoming a lawman someday, and Yates did not doubt he'd make a good one. Sarah, at 11, was developing into a strong-willed, independent girl who reminded Yates so much of Lillian it sometimes made his heart ache. She was smart as a whip and determined to get an education, to maybe even go to college someday. Yates and Lillian encouraged her ambitions, even though many in town thought it was improper for a girl to have such goals. And the twins, at 6, were still inseparable, still communicating in their mysterious twin language, still getting into trouble together and protecting each other fiercely. They were the babies of the family, and everyone spoiled them terribly. In 1888, Thomas married Elizabeth in a beautiful ceremony at the church in Eagle Pass. The whole town came out for the celebration, and Yates felt tears in his eyes as he watched his son exchange vows. Thomas was a man now, starting his own family, and while Yates was proud, he also felt the bittersweet ache of time passing. "He will be fine," Lillian whispered, slipping her hand into his. "We raised him well. He knows what love looks like because he saw it every day in our home." "I know," Yates said. "I just cannot believe how fast it went. It feels like yesterday we were teaching him to ride." "It does go fast," Lillian agreed, "which is why we need to cherish every moment we have." Thomas and Elizabeth built a house on the far edge of the ranch property, close enough to help with the work, but far enough to have their own space. And a year later, they made Yates and Lillian grandparents for the first time when Elizabeth gave birth to a little girl they named Lucy. Holding his granddaughter for the first time, Yates felt a rush of emotion so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees. This tiny baby was part of him, part of Lillian, part of the family they'd built from nothing. She represented the future, the legacy they were creating. "She is beautiful," Lillian said, looking at Lucy with such love and tenderness. "Oh, Yates, we are grandparents. Can you believe it?" "Barely," Yates admitted. "I feel too young to be a grandfather." "Well, you are not," Lillian teased. "You are 48 years old, and you have gray in your hair." "You have gray, too," Yates pointed out, and Lillian laughed. "I earned every single one of these gray hairs," she said. 5 children and a ranch and a stubborn husband will do that to a woman." "Hey now, who are you calling stubborn?" Yates protested, but he was smiling. They stood together, watching Thomas and Elizabeth with their new daughter, and Yates felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. His life had turned out better than he could have ever imagined. He had a wife he adored, children and grandchildren who filled his days with purpose and joy, and a successful ranch that would provide for generations to come. More years passed, bringing more changes. Henry did indeed become a lawman, getting appointed as a deputy in Eagle Pass when he was 21. Sarah left for college in San Antonio when she was 18, one of the few women in her class, determined to become a teacher. The twins, now teenagers, were still inseparable, working the ranch alongside Yates and Thomas, and the family kept growing. Thomas and Elizabeth had 2 more children, a boy and another girl. Yates and Lillian's house, though large, was often filled to bursting with grandchildren, and Yates loved every chaotic moment of it. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1896, Yates and Lillian took a rare day away from the ranch, riding out to the spot where he'd found her and Thomas in the snow all those years ago. The boulder was still there, though the landscape had changed, become more settled. They stood together, looking at the place where their lives had intersected, where everything had changed. "I think about that day often," Lillian said softly. "How scared I was, how certain I was that Thomas and I were going to die, and then you appeared like an angel sent to save us." "I was no angel," Yates said, "just a man who could not leave someone in need." "You were my angel," Lillian insisted. "You saved our lives, Yates, and then you gave us a life worth living. You gave us love and security and a family. You gave us everything." Yates pulled her close, holding her against his chest. "You gave me everything too," he said. "Before I found you, I was just existing, not really living. You taught me what it means to love, to be part of something bigger than myself. You made me a husband and a father and a grandfather. You made me whole." They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, thinking about all they'd been through, all they'd built together. 20 years of marriage, of love, of challenges overcome and joys shared. 20 years of waking up beside each other, of raising children, of building a legacy. "I want 20 more years," Lillian said. "And 20 after that. I want to grow old with you, Yates. I want to see all our grandchildren grow up. I want to die in your arms when we are both ancient and gray." "That sounds perfect to me," Yates said, kissing her softly. "Whatever time we have left, I want to spend it with you." They rode back to the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. The house came into view, light spilling from the windows, and Yates could see figures moving inside. His family, his home, his entire world. That evening, the whole family gathered for a celebration dinner. Thomas and Elizabeth brought the children. Henry came with his new wife, Anna, whom he'd married just 6 months prior. Sarah was home from San Antonio for the summer. The twins were there, of course, along with Peter Wright and his wife, who'd become such a part of the family that it was impossible to imagine celebrations without them. The table was crowded and loud, with everyone talking over each other, sharing stories and laughter. Yates sat at the head of the table with Lillian beside him, and he looked around at all the faces he loved, feeling his heart swell with emotion. "I want to say something," he announced, and gradually the noise died down as everyone turned to look at him. 20 years ago today, I married the love of my life. Best decision I ever made. Lillian, you have given me more happiness than I ever thought possible. You have been my partner, my best friend, the mother of my children, and the center of my world. I thank God every single day that I found you and Thomas in that snow, that I got the chance to love you and be loved by you." Lillian was crying, and most of the women at the table were too. Even some of the men looked suspiciously misty-eyed. "And to all of you," Yates continued, gesturing around the table, "you are the reason I work so hard, the reason I get up every morning. This family, this love we share, is the most important thing in the world to me. Thank you for being part of my life. Thank you for making it so rich and full." To Yates and Lillian, Thomas said, raising his glass, "The best parents and grandparents anyone could ask for." To Yates and Lillian, everyone echoed, raising their glasses. The celebration went late into the night, with music and dancing and more food than any group could possibly eat. And through it all, Yates and Lillian stayed close to each other, hands linked, occasionally stealing kisses when they thought no one was looking. "This is everything I ever wanted," Lillian told him as they danced slowly in the living room, the furniture pushed back to make space. "This love, this family, this life, thank you for giving it to me." "Thank you for saying yes," Yates replied. "Thank you for trusting me, for building this with me. I love you, Lillian, more than words can express." "I love you too," Lillian said, "always and forever." The years continued to roll by, bringing more grandchildren, more changes, more adventures. Yates and Lillian grew older together, their hair turning gray, lines appearing on their faces. But their love never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger, deeper, more essential. When Yates turned 60 in 1908, the whole family gathered again for a massive celebration. By now, there were 14 grandchildren, with more on the way. The ranch had grown to over 1,000 acres and was one of the most successful in the region. Thomas had taken over most of the day-to-day operations, though Yates still helped out when he could. Henry was the sheriff of Eagle Pass now, respected and admired throughout the county. Sarah was a teacher in San Antonio, making a difference in the lives of her students. And the twins ran a successful horse breeding operation on a portion of the ranch land. "Look at what we built," Lillian said to Yates as they sat on the porch, watching the controlled chaos of the birthday celebration in the yard. "Look at all the lives we touched, all the love we created." "It all started with you," Yates said, "with the day I found you in the snow. That was the day my real life began." "Mine too," Lillian agreed. "Everything before that was just preparing me to meet you, to build this life with you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their family. The grandchildren were running around, playing tag and laughing. Their children were talking and joking with each other, the bonds between them strong and unbreakable. And everywhere Yates looked, he saw love and joy and the fruits of the life he and Lillian had built together. "I have no regrets," Yates said suddenly. "Not a single one. Every choice I made, every path I took led me here. And here is exactly where I want to be." "Me too," Lillian said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Though if I am being honest, I do have one regret." Yates looked at her in surprise. "What is it?" "I regret that we will not live forever," Lillian said softly. because forever would not be long enough to love you, to enjoy this life we built. Yates felt tears prick his eyes. We will have to make the most of whatever time we have left, he said. Love each other as fiercely as we can for as long as we can. That is my plan, Lillian said, tilting her face up to kiss him. To love you with everything I have every single day until my last breath. And beyond, Yates added. I believe we will find each other again, whatever comes after this life. Our love is too strong to end. I believe that too, Lillian said. They stayed on the porch until the sun went down and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Their family's voices and laughter drifted up to them, a symphony of love and connection. And Yates thought about how a single choice, a simple decision to help two strangers in a snowstorm, had led to all of this. Had led to a love that spanned decades, to children and grandchildren, to a legacy that would endure long after he and Lillian were gone. It was more than he'd ever hoped for, more than he'd ever dreamed possible. And as he sat there with Lillian in his arms, surrounded by the evidence of their love, Yates knew with absolute certainty that he was the most blessed man who had ever lived. The final years of Yates and Lillian's life together were peaceful and filled with contentment. They watched more grandchildren be born, saw some of them marry and start families of their own, making them great-grandparents. They celebrated anniversaries and birthdays and holidays, always surrounded by family, always grateful for every moment they had together. As they grew older, their bodies slowed down but their minds stayed sharp, and their love stayed strong. They spent their days quietly, sitting on the porch, taking short walks around the ranch, telling stories to whichever grandchildren or great-grandchildren happened to be visiting. And every night, they fell asleep in each other's arms, just as they had for over 40 years. On a warm spring evening in 1916, Yates and Lillian sat on their porch watching the sunset, as they had done thousands of times before. They were both 84 years old now, their bodies frail but their spirits still vibrant. The ranch was thriving under Thomas's management, and the family had grown to include 23 grandchildren and 7 great-grandchildren, with more on the way. It has been a good life, Yates said softly, his hand clasped in Lillian's. The best life. The very best, Lillian agreed. I would not change a single moment of it. Not even the hard parts, not even Charles abandoning you, not even that, Lillian said firmly, because that led me to you. And you, Yates Emerson, have been worth every hardship, every struggle, every moment of pain. You made all of it worthwhile. Yates raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. You are the love of my life, he said. My only love, my forever love. Thank you for 40 wonderful years of marriage. Thank you for this family, this life. Thank you for everything. Thank you for finding us, Lillian whispered. Thank you for not riding past that boulder. Thank you for saying you are both coming with me. Those 7 words changed my entire life. They changed mine too, Yates said. They sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple. The ranch spread out before them, the land they'd worked and loved and built into something lasting. In the distance, they could see some of their grandchildren playing in the yard, their laughter carried on the evening breeze. I am tired, Lillian said after a while, her voice soft. But it is a good tired, the tired of a life well lived. Me too, Yates agreed. Ready to call it a night. Soon, Lillian said. Just a few more minutes. I want to watch the stars come out with you one more time. So they sat together as the light faded and the stars began to appear, one by one, dotting the darkening sky. And when Lillian's breathing grew slow, and even when her hand went slack in his, Yates knew that she had fallen asleep peacefully, contentedly, in the place she loved most, with the person she loved most. He held her for a long time, knowing but not quite accepting that she was gone, that this chapter of his life had ended. But even through his grief, he felt grateful. Grateful that they'd had so many years together, that they'd built such a beautiful life, that they'd loved each other so completely. "Thank you," he whispered to her, even though she could no longer hear him. "Thank you for everything. I will love you forever." Lillian was laid to rest in the family cemetery on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a beautiful headstone that read "Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and friend." The funeral was attended by what seemed like the entire county, all the lives she'd touched over the years coming to pay their respects. Yates stood at her graveside, supported by his children, and felt a piece of his heart break away. But he also felt her presence, felt her love surrounding him, and knew that she would want him to keep living, to keep loving, to keep being part of the family they'd created together. He managed 6 more months without her, staying involved with the ranch, spending time with his children and grandchildren, telling stories about Lillian and keeping her memory alive. But everyone could see that he was fading, that without his beloved wife, his reason for living had dimmed. On a cold November night, Yates went to bed in the house he'd built so many years ago, the house where he'd brought his bride, where he'd raised his children, where he'd lived the best years of his life. He felt Lillian's presence strongly, felt her calling to him, and he was ready to answer. "I am coming, my love," he whispered into the darkness. "Wait for me. I am coming." He closed his eyes and let himself drift away toward the light, toward peace, toward Lillian. And as his last breath left his body, he could have sworn he felt her hand in his, heard her voice saying the words she'd said so many times over their 40 years together. "I love you, Yates, always and forever." Yates was buried beside Lillian on the hill overlooking the ranch they'd built together, their headstones side by side, their names linked forever. The inscription on his stone read, "Beloved husband, father, grandfather, and friend." He saved her life and she saved his. The family gathered for the funeral, 3 generations of Emersons paying tribute to the man who had started it all, who had chosen to help 2 strangers in a snowstorm, and in doing so had created a legacy of love that would endure for generations to come. Thomas, now 66 years old himself and looking so much like his father it made people do a double take, spoke at the funeral. "My father was the best man I ever knew," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "He taught me what it means to be a husband, a father, a man of integrity and honor. He showed me that love is not just a feeling but a choice, a commitment you make every single day. And he loved my mother with everything he had, from the moment he found us in that snow until his last breath." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces, the family that had grown from that one act of kindness so many years ago. "We are all here because of a choice he made, because he could have ridden past that boulder, could have told himself it was not his problem, but he did not. He stopped. He helped. And because of that choice, all of us exist. Every person standing here, every child, every grandchild, every great-grandchild, we are all living proof of the power of compassion, of love, of choosing to help someone in need." There were tears on every face, but they were not just tears of grief. They were tears of gratitude, of love, of recognition of the precious gift they'd all been given. The gift of Yates and Lillian's love, the gift of family, the gift of a legacy that would endure. After the funeral, the family gathered at the ranch house, now occupied by one of the grandchildren but still filled with memories of Yates and Lillian. They told stories late into the night, laughing and crying, remembering all the moments that had made their family what it was. And as the evening wore on, as the stories were told and retold, it became clear that Yates and Lillian's love had done more than create a family. It had created a blueprint for how to love, how to choose each other every day, how to build something lasting and beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. The ranch continued to thrive, passed down through the generations. The family grew and spread, with some staying in Texas and others moving to different states, different places. But they all carried with them the story of how it had begun, of a cowboy who found a woman and her child abandoned in the snow and said 7 simple words that changed everything. "You are both coming with me." Those words became a family motto of sorts, a reminder to always help those in need, to choose compassion over indifference, to recognize that one small act of kindness can ripple outward in ways you cannot possibly imagine. And every generation made sure to tell the story to the next, keeping Yates and Lillian's memory alive, honoring the love that had started it all. Years turned into decades, and decades into a century, but the legacy endured. Great-great-great-grandchildren who never met Yates and Lillian still knew their story, still felt the impact of their love. The ranch house, carefully maintained and preserved, became a gathering place for family reunions, a touchstone connecting them all to their shared history. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the Texas sky turns orange and pink with sunset, people swear they can feel the presence of Yates and Lillian on that porch, can almost hear their voices, can almost see them sitting together, holding hands, watching over the family they created. Because true love never really dies. It lives on in the children and grandchildren, in the stories and memories, in the choices made and the lives touched. Yates and Lillian's love was the kind that transcends death, that echoes through generations, that proves that sometimes, in the midst of the coldest winter, in the darkest moment, an angel can appear in the form of a cowboy on a bay horse, ready to say the words that will change everything. "You are both coming with me." And from those 7 words, a love story was born that would last forever, a testament to the power of compassion, the strength of commitment, and the enduring beauty of choosing love every single day, no matter what. Their story was proof that happily ever after is not just a fairy tale ending, but something that can be built, brick by brick, choice by choice, through years of dedication and devotion and deep, abiding love. The Emerson family ranch still stands in Eagle Pass, Texas, a monument to what began that cold winter day in 1876. And every year, on the anniversary of the day Yates found Lillian and Thomas in the snow, the family gathers at the ranch to remember, to give thanks, and to honor the love that made it all possible. They stand together, descendants of that love, living proof that one man's choice to help, to care, to love, can create ripples that spread across time itself. They tell the story again, making sure the youngest generation understands where they came from, what their family is built on. And they recommit themselves to living out that legacy, to choosing compassion and love in their own lives, to being the kind of people Yates and Lillian would be proud to call their own. This is how a love story ends, not with an ending at all, but with a continuation, a legacy that goes on and on. This is how 2 people, brought together by chance and desperation and a snowstorm in Texas, created something that will never truly end. This is how love conquers death, transcends time, and becomes eternal. And somewhere, beyond the veil that separates this world from the next, Yates and Lillian are together still, their hands linked, their love unbroken, watching over the family they created and smiling at the beautiful, messy, wonderful legacy of their love. Forever and always, just as they promised each other on that porch so many years ago, the end of their earthly story, but the beginning of their eternal one. The end of one chapter, but the continuation of a legacy that will never truly end. Because love like theirs does not die. It transforms, it endures, it lives on in every heart it touched, in every life it changed, in every generation that follows. And that, more than anything, is the true measure of a life well lived and a love well loved. Not in the years counted, but in the impact made. Not in the days lived, but in the legacy left behind. Yates and Lillian's love created a family, a home, a future full of hope and possibility. And that love, that choice, that commitment echoes still, a testament to what two people can build when they choose each other, when they choose love, when they choose to say yes to the possibility of happily ever after. Their story is complete, their love fulfilled, their legacy secure. And the ranch stands as proof, generation after generation, that love is the strongest force in the universe, capable of transforming tragedy into triumph, of building hope from despair, of creating something beautiful and lasting from the most unlikely of beginnings. This is their story. This is their legacy. This is the proof that love, real and true and lasting, is not only possible but worth fighting for, worth building, worth cherishing every single day. From that first moment in the snow to their final breaths and beyond, Yates and Lillian proved that happily ever after is not a destination but a journey, taken hand in hand, heart to heart, for all the days of your life and into eternity itself.